Cimoooooooo!
What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. Today I wanted to bring you a video discussing how to beat Metalfoes. That's right. So, in Japan, Metalfoes is one of the strongest archetypes to be released out of the Dark Illusion, and we've seen that. It's kind of since been overtaken by ABC, but it's still a highly competitive deck, and a lot of people are hyping up the archetype as a whole. Now, as a result of that, I figured it'd be a perfect time to pretty much release a video on a lot of different ways to handle the deck, because the deck is a little bit intricate, it's really strong, and I think it deserves, making a video to let all of you guys know what you can use to counteract the Metalfoes. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get right into it. The first thing that you can use to stop Metalfoes, and really any Pendulum deck as a whole, and it's going to be your best friend, is Anti-Spell Fragrance. Now, basically, if you flip Anti-Spell Fragrance up against any Pendulum deck, they're pretty much just going to shit themselves because you pretty much just, almost won the game outright. Anti-Spell Fragrance is such an extremely powerful card because it doesn't let them place any Pendulum Monsters in the Pendulum Scales, and any of their spells, like MST or anything like that, if they didn't draw them, they have to now set for a turn before they can even activate. So in a lot of cases, Anti-Spell Fragrance can basically just say GG, and it might as well just say that on the card text. So next, moving on, again with any Pendulum deck, is a lot of different spell and trap hate/removal. Now, we've got things like MST, Twin Twisters, which Twin Twisters is still arguably the most popular option for spell and trap removal. Typhoon is also a card that's seen a lot of popularity, and why I want to highlight Typhoon is because when the Metalfoes are doing all their shenanigans during their turn, if you happen to have Typhoon in your hand and they have 2 spell or traps on the field, you can use it as a hand trap, so you can basically pop one of their scales in the action of them trying to resolve one of those effects and popping a card to basically search more cards. You can just stop the card right then and there, and that's the best case scenario for you because then they might just not have any more plays after that. So it's a really powerful card to have in hand, especially going second if they're going first. And that's why Ghost Ogre is also another viable option as well, for the same reason. But Ghost Ogre is a lot more versatile because not only can Ghost Ogre hit scales, but it can also hit their monsters as well. Sure, it might not negate any effects, but it will be destroying the monster if you are targeting a monster. Of course, if you're targeting a Pendulum Scale, it's going to destroy that and make the effect not resolve because they have to stay face up to resolve fully, just like any continuous spell or trap does. There's also Cosmic Cyclone, the new card out of Dark Illusion that I've been kind of hyping up a little bit, and the reason I love this card so much is not only does it get rid of the scale, but it banishes it so it doesn't go to the extra deck, and that's really huge for a Pendulum deck because that's how they recur so many of their resources. Being able to stop something as important also as their Metalfoes Fusion, because a lot of the time they're not using this card to fuse, but they're actually using it just to pop off one of their Metalfoes scales to get a free +1 from the shuffle and draw effect. If you can banish Metalfoes Fusion, that puts them really far behind, or even if you can banish any of their scales in action of them trying to do any combos, Cosmic Cyclone is just a really strong card against Metalfoes, but Pendulum really as a whole, so that's why I highly recommend that card as well. Moving on, so we talked about, Anti-Spell Fragrance and all the spell and trap hate. You can also pretty much target the Pendulum Monsters directly, and by that I mean you can pretty much use the Solemn Brigade, Solemn Strike, Solemn Warning, Solemn Scolding. If you hit the Pendulum Summon, it's going to really set them back a big, big way. And then, on top of that, the monsters are going to go to grave since their summon was negated. They're not going to go back to the extra deck, and they might just outright lose right there as well. And the other reason why Strike, Warning, and Scolding are also important is because the deck has a tendency to go into a lot of crazy monsters like Ultimaya Zulkin, Crystal Wing, and just a lot of crazy stuff from the extra deck. So, if you have these cards, you can also stop the summon of those as well. So that's very, very important to note. So moving on from that, we've talked about all those. You can also just stop the special summoning as a whole. Cards like Vanity's Fiend, Vanity's Emptiness, Fossil Dyna if you really want to go there. It's a little bit awkward because their attributes are fire, so you can't use something that would stop light or dark special summons, which is kind of what we've been using lately in the meta since the meta's been primarily light and dark, but Vanity's Fiend, Vanity's Emptiness, and Fossil Dyna in some cases will suffice just as well. I mean, there's a lot of instances where they really can't do a whole lot against the Vanity's Emptiness if you have a somewhat established board, or even a Vanity's Fiend as a whole. I mean, they can pop some cards with some scales, but that's pretty much as far as they're gonna get. So don't really have a lot of options there unless they just find one of their more generic outs to one of those cards. Then moving on, we also have a card that I think is really strong, that's Magical Spring. Now, for those of you who don't know what this card is, basically when you activate this card, you draw cards equal to the number of spell and traps your opponent has, and then you discard equal to the number that you have. So for instance, say your opponent has 2 Pendulum Scales up, and just say Magical Spring is the only card you have on Resolution. That being the case, you would draw 2 cards and discard 1, making it a 2 for 2 because you are using the Magical Spring as a card. But if they have a third card, that means you're actually going to go +1 because you're going to draw 3, discard 1, and then Magical Spring is going to go to grave, which is your second card, ultimately being a +1. But the reason not only for the drawing factor that Magical Spring is good, it prevents the cards from being destroyed. And why that's so key is because Metalfoes so often either pop their own scales, or they're going to be popping Metalfoes Fusion, Metalfoes Combination, anything like that to just generate more advantage and getting more card advantage. So by being able to prevent the destruction of those cards, it's kind of bringing their deck to some gridlock because they can't really resolve their combos and keep going forward. They can also even potentially lock themselves out of some certain plays depending on the aspect that, depending on the board state essentially. So Magical Spring can be a really good card in the right circumstance, and not to mention it is potentially a +1, or if anything it'll probably break even. So really cool card there as well. Last but not least, I just want to talk about basically the ultimate way to stop pretty much anything, but especially Metalfoes. If Metalfoes already have an established board, which if you're going second, they're pretty consistent at getting some pretty massive boards, Kaijus are going to be your best friend. I mean, I've talked about Kaiju so much, but you know, when they have boards of Ultimate Zolkin, Crystal Wing, like Omega, or 38, or just all this crazy shit that Metalfoes can do, Kaijus are going to be your best friend, because you are just going to tribute the fuck over it, not deal with any of their bullshit, and you'll be able to probably clear their board more often than not, because if you tribute over a Crystal Wing, or tribute over an Omega, or really just anything like that in general, you should be able to have enough cards on top of that to be able to out the rest of their board, and be able to take control of the game. So that's going to do it for the video. If you guys have any other cards that you think are really awesome against Metalfoes, be sure to let me know down in the comments below. I think we would all love to hear what other advice you guys have. But as always, thank you all so much for watching the video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you next time. Cimoooooooo!